Hi friends, welcome back to Joyful Encounters. If you're new here, my name is Joy. I am a adult working and living in New York City who likes to talk about her feelings both in real life and on the internet. This is going to be a really personal video where I talk about the trauma I went through earlier this year. Since it's a really personal video, I wanted to set calm vibes, so I made myself tea before I shot this video. I also lit up my candles, but I was afraid that I was going to be a fire hazard because I am very clumsy. I decided to just turn it off and show you that I tried and put it aside because I do not want to set my apartment accidentally on fire. There are enough things in my life that's kind of on fire at the moment. So I'm going to structure this video by first talking about what exactly I went through, but more like the TLDR version of what I went through, how I was able to overcome it, and sort of just my journey in the healing process. To give you some context, because I think this is important and I promise to tie it all back later on. I am Chinese Indonesian. I was born and raised in Jakarta. I spent the first 18 years of my life there. So I was really immersed in that Chinese Indonesian society. And for those of you who don't know, a lot of it is very performative and shame is such a huge thing. Some people are probably going to be pissed off by me saying this, but honestly, it is the truth. So much of what people do is to avoid being seen badly, and so many of the good things that people also want to do, it's to get other this general society's approval. I can't really explain the dynamic really well, but all you have to know is shame is a really big thing. Everything people do is driven by this desire to not bring shame to your life or your family or your parents. Unfortunately, cheating is very common, especially when men cheat, and a lot of the times there's no consequence because the girls usually stay quiet because they're afraid that they're gonna get shamed. And as a result, a lot of these guys walk away and go on and date and repeat these toxic cycles. There's this pressure also for girls to get into relationships. One of the worst things you could do is be 25 and be single as a Chinese Indonesian girl. Exhibit A. Sadly, the reason why a lot of girls stay in really toxic relationships, and why, if they do end things, they never really talk about it, because shame is such a big concept and they're afraid that if they talk about it, it's gonna make them look bad. Let's go back to a few months ago, which is at least 6 months ago. I don't remember exactly when now, but I basically found out that my ex-boyfriend, but ex-boyfriend is too good of a term to use, but then the person I was with for a little over a year, I randomly Googled his name one day and I found that 2 months earlier, when he told me he was vacationing with his family, he actually got married and he has a secret wife in Indonesia. I know, crazy, right? To add to all of that, we later found out, by we meaning his friends and I, found out that he also had been lying about the last 5 years of his life. He did not go to college that he said he did. So this man was essentially a con artist. I don't want to throw the word trauma around lightly because I know that it's a heavy word and I don't want to take away meaning from it by using it, but I genuinely feel what I went through was really hard. So what happened then was I did the unconventional thing, especially for a Chinese Indonesian girl. I blasted him on my Instagram. I made a video where I posted all the receipts, and my main goal when doing that was so that everyone knew what happened, so that he will not get away. Unlike all those other men who are walking around Jakarta now with no consequences, I did not want him to live without consequences. And I took that video down not because I feel ashamed. It did what it was supposed to do, and I sort of just want to move on with my life. I'm only talking about this because I want to recap it, because I think it's important to have a context as to what happened and sort of what I went through. It became viral in Jakarta because, first of all, no girl is normally outspoken enough to stand up for herself, and the fact that I made it all public, so many girls reach out to me in my DMs telling me how their boyfriend had been cheating on them. And I think the craziest bit for me was this founder who I admire, she DM'd me, and she DM'd me specifically just to say that men are trash, you deserve better. And I was like, you too? You too? You're accomplished, beautiful woman, you also think that men are trash? What hope do I have? So that was the gist of it. Obviously, I was very shook, I was very traumatized, and I was in a really bad shape. I think the first week, I couldn't really breathe. I did not eat for days. The night after I found out, and my friends came over, and I slept over my friend's place. But then I literally could not sleep. It just felt like my life was a living nightmare. I had to take sick days from mental health days because my brain was I was just so out of it. I had to call my best friend, my high school best friend from Indonesia, who kept me up all night and just stayed with me because I literally could not sleep. My brother had to fly in. Hopefully, no more traumatic events like that because I don't think I can get through it again. Okay, so let's talk about the shame part of going through a traumatic event. You subconsciously feel embarrassed or ashamed because you're kind of like, how did this happen? A lot of times people don't want to talk about it. People don't want to acknowledge their trauma or the things that they went through because they feel like if they talk about it, then it's embarrassing because how did they let it happen to them? Shame is like such a big thing when you're going through a rough time. I grew up seeing a lot of people suppress and not talk about the things that happened to them because they think it's shameful. I think the last thing I wanted for myself was to feel ashamed. And that's why I talked about it. That's why I was so open about what I went through because I did not want to be shamed and I didn't want to feel ashamed. I believe that shame is something that consumes you from the inside. Although you sweep that problem under the rug because you're not technically talking about it, that shame eats you up. I think it's really important when you just went through something really shitty to be like open about it. You don't have to be as open as I was, but you definitely need to let it out. Whether it's by talking to a therapist, talking to someone you trust, or writing it down in a journal. You know the book The Body Keeps Score? It talks about how your body subconsciously like registers all these trauma and it manifests into like all kinds of sicknesses. And I did not want to keep that trauma in me. And I did not want that shame to, in 20 years, turn into some kind of disease. So first was like me trying to like get away from feeling ashamed. But the other thing was like, I started having beef with the word strong. Like so many of my friends told me like, oh my God, you're like so strong because if I were you, I'd like literally lose my mind and all that. Until this day, whenever someone tells me like, Joe, you're so gritty, you're so strong, I get a little bit upset. Not in the sense that I'm upset towards that person because I know they mean well. I know they're trying to like comfort me. It made me feel like, why do I have to be strong? Like, why can't I have petty problems? Why do I have to be strong? Why do I have to deal with like trauma? Why do I have to deal with all of this? Whenever people said that, it was a sort of reminder that like, oh my God, what I went through was crazy. And I wish I hadn't gone through something off that scale. You know, at the end of the day, I had to make the peace with the fact that I did. But I learned to sort of just accept that that shitty thing happened because that's just life. Sometimes really bad things happen and you can't explain it. The more you try to unpack, analyze, do a post-mortem analysis of like what went wrong, where you could have done better in a way, it will not help you. If anything, it will just like make it harder to move on. Yeah, I just learned that sometimes bad things happen. Some people just have to be stronger than others. But let's talk about the pace of moving on. From the period of May to September until I went to Paris, I didn't realize how much my life and my insides had been filled with dread. Yes, I do not have the inclination to get back together, but it was really hard for me to look at my future and feel great. And it was only until 2 weeks ago, and that's why I decided to make this video, that I start feeling hopeful about myself, my life, and my future. I just felt like life had let me down in such a major way that it felt silly to trust that life would turn out for the better. But having hope is just important to live your day to day with lightness instead of like dread. But it was really hard for me to move on from that dread. I'm gonna talk about processing, like just how I was able to process everything. I think there are two main methods. It was processing externally and internally. Ugly crying, friends, therapy, hobbies, and family. Ugly crying is simple. You just like ugly cry to like music. It's a really cathartic thing. You just cry and cry and cry and you let go of like these emotions that you didn't even realize you were suppressing. When something traumatic happens, you feel empty and it's sometimes almost hard to cry. That emptiness in itself is a feeling, and that's also what I felt the first few weeks. Processing internally, journaling. I have been journaling since I was a teen, but only started becoming more serious in 2019. And then the important lesson of understanding your trauma or pain. Like I said before, I don't think it's really helpful to understand why something happened. A lot of times we do not have to answer why some crappy things happen. I realize that sometimes crappy things happen just because crappy things are gonna happen. I did grow because of it. I feel like I am a lot more confident and I care a lot less about what other people think. I realized that the worst has happened to me. I managed to overcome it, so I should be able to overcome other things in life as well. Although, really, please, like, I do not want more trauma in life. Like, whoever's like, in charge of my life, please, like, no more character development moments. I'm done. I got to see how much my friends love me. So grateful because would not be able to go through this year without them. Like, so yeah, if you're my friend and you're watching this, you know who you are, and I am so freaking blessed to have you in my life and to have you hold my hand through that really crappy period. But I also want to talk about reconciling with trauma and how to like not let that trauma change you, which I think is the hardest part because I think up to last month, I felt like I did not recognize the girl I was before everything that happened. And now I'm definitely more like on the side of caution. I think when I was in Paris, one of my friends made me remember who I was before everything that happened. I am trying to reconcile who I was then and who I am now, and just to like let all this like come together, be like this version of joy that I love and I'm proud of. If you read the book The Courage of Being Disliked, the opening chapter is really controversial because it made a lot of people mad, but I didn't quite understand it until now. So a lot of people, I feel like, when they go through like traumatic life events, they're like, oh, because I'm traumatized, now I do this, blah blah blah. Which in my case, I feel like it would be like really justifiable if I had said went through, I just hate all men. Like the next time I date someone, I'm gonna be like super controlling. I feel like technically it makes sense for me to do that. You actually have a choice. You have a choice to say in your narrative to be like, because this happened, I will be like this. Or even though this happened, I will not be like that. And I am trying my best to be the latter. I also don't want to make excuses for bad behavior. Like, as much as like that trauma was a big life event and it has changed me in some ways, I don't want it to change me entirely. I don't want it to be what makes me not light or lively or optimistic or ambitious, because those are all the things that I was before then, and I feel like it'd be such a pity if I lost it all and became like incredibly like self-centered and like controlling. The only person I'm hurting in the long run is myself and potentially the person I'm with next if I ever get into another relationship. So, okay, that was a little bit of a rant, but what I'm just trying to say is you have a choice of what to do after something bad happens. You can let it define you and not heal and not move on, or you can acknowledge that it happened, acknowledge that it changed you in some ways, but you're not gonna let it define your whole life. The latter is hopefully what I actually am, or I'm trying to be. Let's talk about the future. I have two main like goals in the next year, which hopefully I will be able to achieve, and I will share more of that if I do achieve it. But right now, I don't want to jinx it. But when it comes to dating, a lot of people ask me like, "Oh, do you have like trust issues?" I don't mistrust everyone who's in my life, but I'm definitely a lot more guarded. And I don't think it's to the extent where like I just hate all men and I don't want to meet people, but I feel like I'm definitely a lot more guarded. Scaled back optimism. Am I actively dating? Like going on dates? No. Am I on dating apps? No. Will I date in the future? Hopefully. I feel like I was never someone who shied away from long-term commitment. Long-term commitment doesn't scare me, and I feel like I am able to prioritize my partner and be a good partner. So hopefully one day I find someone who is good and will not give me further trauma, that I will believe in love again. Yeah, I'm just living life. If it happens, it happens. Everyone has their own timeline. Being single is definitely not something for me to be embarrassed about. Although a lot of Chinese Indonesian girls, when they're 25, they feel like it's the end of the world if they're single. It's not. There are a lot of worse things in life. To wrap things up, healing takes time and in different steps and stages as well. First thing you need to be mindful of is that you do not feel shame and that you're able to reconcile like your identities before and after that thing happens. I will say though, I thought that I healed, I think 2 months after. Like I thought that I was already fine, but what I didn't realize was I was digging another hole in my life called work, but working overtime a lot. And then like after Paris, I just felt a sense of inner peace that I have not felt in months, if not years. And to that, I just have to say that I don't want to say healing, it's weird, but healing takes time. You got this. Know that your pain, your past scars do not define you. If people think that they do, you don't want those people in your life. Anyways, the right people will be able to see you past the things you went through. You're deserving of love. You're great. You are not defined by the shitty things that happen to you. You are more than that. Life can feel crappy, but it's not gonna be forever. I promise you that. Okay, let's go in for a hug because that was a tad bit personal. Thanks for watching, and I really felt compelled to make this video because dealing with our traumas, even like childhood traumas, is like a really important thing, and I hope that this video makes anyone who's going through something bad feel less alone and more hopeful. Okay, bye. Also, FYI, if you know that your man is cheating on you, dump his ass.